Okay, go ahead, Graham, anytime.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of the BiotensegriTea Party, a non-for-profit production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, which is an educational organisation to promote biotensegrity and everything connected with it. My name today, we're going to be introducing our guests in a moment, Julia Blau and Jeff Wagman, and we'll come to them in just a moment. My name is Graham Scarr, and I'm coming from Nottingham in the UK. And my co-hosts are Susan Lolder-Solorzano.
Hi, I'm in Washington, D.C.
And Chris Marita Clancy.
Hi, everyone. I'm just outside of Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation.
Great, thank you. I think we go to a toast now.
Yeah. Julia, do you mind?
Absolutely. I requested one from my father, who gave me an old Irish one. When you are sliding down the banister of life, may all of the splinters be pointing in the right direction.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I love it. It even gives a nod to entropy. I'm going to be interviewing Julia Blau and Jeff Wagman today. And maybe, Chris, you could spotlight the three of us, and maybe everybody else could turn off their video for this part. And I'll let Julia and Jeff kind of give a more thorough interview in a second, but I'm going to actually do a little screen share of a short clip from an old movie that I'm hoping will set us up. And you can see this, yes?
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see.
Brain room. Come in, motor function 12. Check. His leg itches. Scratch the left leg. The leg has been scratched.
There's a joke coming in on 4-1.
Prepare response for incoming joke.
Joke response 18.2.
Smile, please.
He's smiling.
Brain to stomach. Brain to stomach.
Stomach to brain. Over.
Food coming down.
What kind?
Fettuccine.
Jesus Christ. Italian food coming down.
Again? Italian food?
Stomach proceeding with breakdown of fettuccine.
This is mission control. Mission control. Please stand by for systems check.
How do you like that? Have you seen it before?
I have not. I have not.
I have not either.
It's from Woody Allen's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, something like that.
Yeah. There's the modern day equivalent of that is the cartoon Inside Out, which has this,
exactly right.
right, same sort of fleet of homunculi taking care of that with the keyboard.
So we'll I thought you'd appreciate it. So for anybody who's not on our Biotensegrity Archive email list, Jeff and Julia are both really thought leaders in the area of ecological psychology, which is an area of psychology that's been very biotensegrity friendly, let's say, for quite a long time. And we've got you here today because I feel like, well, I know that I was realizing I didn't have a good enough understanding, it's all about me, of ecological psychology. And so I've been doing a deep dive into it for the last year and a half or two. And I just thought we just need to have a conversation about how our two largely unconnected fields, but connected in terms of theory a lot, I think. We just needed to open the conversation. So you're part of a series. This is part of a series that we're calling the ecological perspective.
Love it.
Julia, can you give us just an overview of like how you came to be where you are, how you stumbled on this thing? And we need to define ecological psychology too. But I
Sure.
want to hear both of you about your path to get here first.
Sure. Yeah, it's a meandering path, I'll be honest. I went off to college thinking I was going to do something very different with my life. I was going to be a math teacher. Like I had a plan. But then I got there and the classes didn't sit well with me. It didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. And actually, I dropped out of school and worked at a ski lodge for a year. And then came back and started taking just gen ed classes to try and figure out what I wanted to do while getting the gen eds taken care of. And I took intro psych as part of that, switched my major immediately to psych because I loved it so much. And then I took really every course UConn had to offer in psychology. At the end, I could have double majored in psychology and psychology. Like that's how many credits I took. And somewhere in there, towards the end, actually, I took Sensation and Perception with Claudio Corello, who's one of the founding names of ecological psychology. And I was in that class, and it was like light bulbs going off. It was fireworks. It felt like all of these things that I had been interested in, had all this curiosity about, were all being here in this class, right? So I literally went up to her after class one day and I was like, so how do I become, you when I grow up? And she pulled out of her bag. I love telling this story. She pulled out of her bag. She had a application for an independent study and she had a sticky note on it that had my name on it. And she said, I've just been waiting for you, and handed it to me. So that's how I ended up in the field, is that I then just like sort of followed Claudia for ever. Like I continued to go. I did this independent study with her, and then I applied to and went to grad school. She was my advisor, and Jeff and I actually went to the same program and had the same advisor, and that's how we ended up here.
Wow, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Jeff, can we hear your story?
My story is also a little meandering, but meandering toward the beginning, and then once I hit a particular point, it was a pretty straight shot. I was just, as Julie was telling her story, I was thinking about um, complex systems and sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and if you change something very early on by just a little bit, you can end up in a very different place. And I was thinking about that because I went to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and I only went there. I mean, I went there for a few reasons, but the reason I applied there was because my girlfriend's at the time's mother said, "Why don't you apply to this place?" I took some classes there. I really enjoyed it. I think you'd like it. And as a way to sort of get in good with my girlfriend's mother, I was like, okay, all right, I'll I'll apply to this place, which turned out to be Franklin and Marshall College. And it was the best place for me. It turned out to be the best place for me. And there I had uh, two faculty members in psychology who were my professors at that time, one of whom was a more traditional perceptual psychologist, and the other was an ecological psychologist, uh, a guy by the name of Ed Reed, who was a philosopher and who was on some of the very early publications that sort of established ecological psychology and took the mantle from Gibson and their combined influence on me sent me to the University of Connecticut. Um, and when I went to visit, this is a story I like to tell. When I went to visit, I was completely floored, not just by the faculty members, not just by people like Michael Turvey and Claudia Carello and Bob Shaw, but also by the students. They have an apprenticeship model there where the more senior students are um, train the younger students, and it just they were so impressive to me, and I wanted to be a part of that, and it felt like home to me in a lot of ways. It felt like an intellectual home. I felt like they were really on to something and the what they were pursuing academically, but I also felt like it was a social home. They were very charming and very they treated everybody who came to visit as equals, and it felt like I wanted to be there, and it was again the best place for me to be. Um, and Julie and I I don't think we overlapped there.
We
I think I
didn't.
may have been walking out as you were walking in, but
That's
we were
exactly right.
separated by about 5 years or so.
That's exactly right. We met
Yeah,
at the first conference I ever went to.
yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so here's the big question. What is ecological psychology and why should we care? Um,
Prepared for this one.
all right, Julia looks like she's ready for this one.
Oh, just because it's one we've been trained to have to answer, right? Because not a lot of people know. And so it is, and the expectation was that you're going to go out into the job market and you're going to be applying for these jobs and people are going to go, "You have your degree in what?" So we've been trained to answer this question in varying lengths, right? Like there's the 30-second elevator pitch, and then there's all right, we're going to do a whole semester and teach you the real. So listen, it's a lot of things, but the biggest to me is understanding things in their proper context. And that's where the name comes from, is the ecological part of things, is putting things back into the proper context. And I think this will make contact with this group, considerably, because what we look at is that perception is for action, right? The reason that we perceive is not to make pretty pictures. It's so that I can pick up my mug here and drink my tea. And so being able to, marshal those degrees of freedom and being able to recognize that that is pick upable, that is what is necessary, not a motor program and those little homunculuses in that room with all of the buttons. And so we sort of take things away from that model of a homunculus running the show to a organism environment relationship where the focus is on the actual everyday needs of perception, which includes action.
All right. Jeff, would you give your
Yeah.
definition, which may be a little different?
Well, I think I would just layer on top of that. I would describe
Great.
it as a law-based approach to perceiving, acting, and thinking. And it's that lawfulness is the key. It's what differentiates it from the kind of homunculus-driven processes that in the video clip. And so it's an approach that attempts to understand those processes as the detection and exploitation of lawfully structured stimulation patterns.
Yeah.
And if you can find the lawfully structured stimulation patterns, then the organism can be tied to those. And then you can explain perceiving and acting and thinking without having to insert representations and motor programs and those other things. You were ramping up the sophistication of the variables to which the animal is attuned, and then it sort of squeezes out additional processes that don't have the same don't have the same lawfulness, and and you do that by respecting the context, like Julie was saying. Once you zoom out and say, this is the system we're interested in, not this, then you start to reveal this lawfulness.
Yeah.
So can you tell us, Jeff, what you mean for anyone who is unfamiliar with the term by lawfulness?
Lawfulness refers to as well as we're leaning on scientific laws. So when I talk about this in class, I gave a talk once and I was talking about this as a lawful phenomenon. And somebody in the audience was like, so it's not illegal? Is that what you mean? No, no, no. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that it is based on the laws of nature. It is laws are relationships that hold across contexts. And if you've found lawful relations, then you have a reliable means by which the system can do what it does. And you don't need to reinvent an explanation in a different context um, because those explanations carry across contexts.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So biotensegrity and ecological psychology, these two areas of inquiry or study have been, people in those areas have been in touch with each other peripherally for a long time. Sergio Fonseca and Michael Turvey and Claudia Corello, and I can't remember Sergio's wife's name right now, but all four of them were with us in 2015 when the International Fascia Research Congress was outside of Washington, D.C. here. And so we got to hang out, and Steve threw a big dinner party, and they were there. But I feel like since that time, and in 2014, Turvey and Fonseca had put out this paper about haptic perception.
Yeah.
But I feel like since that time, the two fields have been evolving very independent of each other, not with a lot of contact. And actually, Sergio's going to come and talk to us in a few weeks. And I know he spent some time in Connecticut. I think he introduced.
It did. Yep.
Yeah, the
He
idea
was there when I was there.
biotensegrity. Yeah. I think he introduced the idea of biotensegrity to Michael Turvey.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've got this, it's like we're long lost cousins, right? So
I like that.
so what I want to know is, what do they teach you guys about biotensegrity, and what's your awareness of it, and does it have anything to do with what you do? And I already know somewhat the answer because I've read what you guys have written. But Julia, why don't you take it first?
Yeah. So I'm so nervous now that I'm going to get it wrong because I've got like a whole panel of people who are going to fact check me. But all right. So here's what we were taught. First, they show us a tensegrity structure, right? So he's got one. I think it's the one we bought.
I have one.
The book. And it's the hard pieces pulled together with the elastic
bands, yeah.
Right. And that it has a shape even though no hard part is touching another hard part. And more than that, I was just going to say, when you move it, if you push on one part of it, it moves the whole structure, right? And self-organizes around that piece that you've pushed on, and it becomes a whole new set, right? By itself. You don't have to make a motor program to make everything change. You just add a force in one direction and the whole thing changes accordingly. And here's my memory of the history of this. And now I'm feeling like Michael
you don't have to
come
give
back. And
you don't have to give the history of biotensegrity. It's more.
No. I meant
yeah,
we were looking for it, right? So we were looking for something to replace the model that had been dominating action and perception for forever, which is this body as machine model, right? Where everything is this like fully feed forward. You make a motor program. There's the homunculus typing on the little, thing, dialing the knobs, and suddenly you scratch a leg, right? So that isn't going to work for us given the way that we were talking about all of this. And so enter biotensegrity, and here is a system that can react and adapt flexibly and dynamically. So this just absolutely made sense to the way that we were trying to understand both action and perception, right? So you were talking about like the haptic perception and how we use it in that, but it's also in the action part of things, because if you have a system that is so reactive, right, you can make a lot happen with very little adjustments across that system. So this is where we're married, right? Or where we're cousins, or however we want to familiarize this, but that's my understanding. How'd I do, Jeff?
I think you did well. I wasn't there at the time that Sergio was bringing these ideas to Michael, but when I first encountered them, probably in a talk that Michael gave somewhere, but most especially in the paper that you mentioned, the Turvey and Fonseca paper about the haptic perception, and that was a magical paper for me, because it's a really dense and challenging paper. But what I got from it was that a biotensegrity system is a field-based system. It's a deformation field. That's what you're describing with a biotensegrity system, and that's what we need in an ecological understanding of perception by touch. Ecological psychology, we didn't mention this before, but ecological psychology is a field-based perspective. It's not a particle-based perspective. We're talking about how the surrounding light distribution is structured in a way that allows us to perform goal-directed behaviors. So we need a way to describe the extendedness and of a given media. And so we have the optic array to do that when we talked about vision. We have an acoustic array to do that for us when we talk about hearing.
Yeah.
But for touch, we were missing something. We could describe the forces, and that's what the inertia tensor is. There was decades of research showing that the resistance of an object to being moved in different directions determines perceived properties of that object, but we still didn't have the medium. Where are those forces? How is that being detected?
Yeah.
And so what we needed was a description of a deformation field, and that's what the biointensegrity system did. It provided exactly that. It provided a description of the medium for haptic perception. That's what it meant to me when I came across it. It does more than that, but that's what really excited me about it.
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, that it describes an endlessly reconfigurable system, and it's a system approach. It's a field approach. I mean, I haven't discussed it in terms of field, so this is cool to hear you guys talk about it this way. This is what I love, but it's a systemic approach. It's the difference between the machine model, as you say, which is something that is, boy, still out
Just
there.
won't die.
Right?
Just won't die.
Well, you can't kill a machine. That's the problem.
No, and I tell you, I want to highlight something that you just said in there, because I feel like it is the most important thing to me, which is the fact that it is multi-stable. Like, it can just be so many different things. And I think that's what's missing from that machine model, is like, there's only one way a machine works. It works that one way. If one part breaks, like, forget it, that machine's broken. But a biotensegrity model allows for adaptability and many different dynamic ways of working that all work. So to me, that was what was really that's what got me, right? Like, that's where I was like, oh, we need that. That's what we need. It's got that thing.
It also explained some of the abilities that we see when we study perception from an ecological perspective. This task specificity, but anatomical independence. This idea that we can, just what Julie was saying, that we can perform a given skill in a number of ways. You can perceive a given property of a wielded object in a number of ways. It doesn't matter how you configure the system. To some extent, that's irrelevant. And the system will reconfigure itself in a way that enables it to perform the task. It's a self-organizing system. It's all of it, like, checks all the boxes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and so it does all of those things. It one of the other primary um, tenets of ecological psychology is this reciprocity between animal and the environment. That's what Julia was talking about with the putting it in context. This provides that. It is like that when you have it is it's formed by that animal environment reciprocity. Um, you don't get the structure without the context. It the a biotensegrity system allows for touch and movement to occur simultaneously together in the same system.
Yes.
It allows for it not to be sequential but simultaneous. It also allows for um, prospectivity. Because the forces get immediately redistributed, there's no time delays. It really is it's a way to explain some of the feats of the touch system
Yeah.
that would be unexplained otherwise, or would rely on, well, just really super fast guesses about what's coming next.
Yeah.
This is great. So, so where are you guys when somebody hears the word psychology, right? They're gonna think brain, nervous system, um, etc. Well, let's just say brain and nervous system will be big pieces.
Sure.
And we should talk about fundamental assumptions at some point, because we have the same problem that we come up against fundamental assumptions that are embedded, entrenched. They just won't die, like the machine model. So where are you if I said, oh, you're a psychologist, so you studied the brain and how we think and how our nervous system works, what would you say, Julia? What would you
So
say?
first of all, that isn't usually what happens. Usually I say, I do psychology, and they're like, let me tell you about my mother. Right. So that's usually, and then I have to explain I don't do that kind of psychology, and my sister does, and you should go talk, but can't help you. But then when we get to the brain and the thing, and you say, yeah, that's part of it. That's definitely part of it. But and we've said this before in other interviews, it's not that the nervous system has no place. It's just that when you're asking the questions that we're asking, it's sort of beside the point, right? Because it is
Not
just
primary.
yeah.
Yeah.
It isn't the primary thing. It is part of the whole system. And you can't, just like Jeff was saying earlier, when you try and just focus on this like one little piece, you can't understand it because you're not seeing the whole story. And the nervous system is just one little piece of this whole big thing. And so I think that the nervous system is just as important as the musculature, is just as important as the um, light structure, is just as important as the series of surfaces in this room. All of those things play exactly the same part in this, in that they're part of a system. So it's not that people don't study that, and that's not important and worthy of study. It's just not what we do.
And what about the brain, Jeff?
What about the brain? Well, yeah, the brain is an important part of that system. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm glad I have a brain, and I don't want to give my brain up. I wouldn't want to go anywhere without it. Um, and it- but animals can do a lot of what I can do, and that when those animals don't have the same kind of brain that I do,
And plants
and plants.
that have no
But
brain at all.
so I think what brains do is allow you to detect and exploit those lawfully structured stimulation patterns I was talking about earlier. And more sophisticated brains might enable you to detect more sophisticated patterns. And some of those sophisticated patterns are what enable things like culture and language, and I'm really glad to have that ability. But if you want to understand, it kind of depends what you want to understand. If you want to understand perceiving, acting, and thinking, well, then you need to be able to understand it in all kinds of creatures that do that. If you are explicitly interested in the human ability to do that, well, that's fine. But now you're doing something a little bit different. And the way I think about the brain, I think I may have mentioned this in another interview we had, is I think of the brain like the lungs. The lungs are an important part of the respiratory system, but they don't breathe. They don't do the breathing. The breathing is because of a relationship among the components of the respiratory system. I need my lungs. I want my lungs. I wouldn't go anywhere without them, but they're not there. They don't do the breathing. The breathing is a systemic activity.
And Damien Kelty Stephen has a great line. I think it's about the brain or the nervous system, one or the other. And he says, I think it does more and less than we think it does. So that basically we've just got maybe an immature understanding of these systems, which I'm hoping the work you guys are doing is helping us get a more mature or a non-assumption based view of these systems. Let's talk about assumptions.
I was talking to my students about this exact idea, maybe a week ago, because the research on the brain is all predicated on a machine-based approach. It is all predicated on a motor program approach. So you go to understand the brain and you're asking questions based in those assumptions. So you're like, well, if it's going to be a motor program, well, then we're going to need to find the part of the brain that simulates the human, right? That this is where it's going to be represented, because you have to have a place where it's represented if you want to build a motor program. So you go and you ask those questions and you find something related to that question. But we need to start asking questions in a different way, using a different set of assumptions. And I think you're about to ask a question about those assumptions, but I think we will have a better sense of the neurology from this perspective once people start doing neuroscience with a different set of assumptions. And they are. We are starting to get people who are doing ecological neuroscience. And they're doing some very interesting work. I think we've got a book in our series that's on ecological neuroscience. Jeff keeps the series nearby.
I got it.
He's helping.
Yeah, this is a wonderful book. In fact, we just had this author come and visit us at my university, Louis
cool.
Favela.
I like him.
Yeah, so there's a whole movement on ecological neuroscience looking at doing neuroscience in a way that is not machine-based.
Right.
And is complex systems-based, where you have, it's a lot more like the respiratory system, where you have these components that each contribute. But what you're looking at is the activity of a system. Yeah. It reminded me, there's a paper by Guy Van Orden, and it's called The Blue Collar Brain. And what he tried to do was to reorient what it is what the brain's role is. The brain's not a central executive. The brain's more at the mercy of the body. It is taking orders from the body, and then rather than the other way around. Yeah, it was an interesting paper. So I think, and that might not be entirely right either, but the point is, it's multi-directional. It's not unidirectional. Mm-hmm. That there is this. There it is. I think somebody just posted the.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Chris,
chat.
I'll have to go read that. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a clever paper, but it's a lot more like, and this is another thing I like about biotensegrity structures, is there's no fundamental orientation to them. It's not hierarchical. It's the responsibility is distributed and shared, and I keep finding things to like about the biotensegrity hypothesis. So
we're just here to flatter you. That's just what we're here to do. It's just to flatter your whole field.
Thank you. So one thing we come up against a lot, when we're studying biotensegrity, well, I remember, and I'm stealing a little bit from an interview you guys did with Madhur Mangalam in Beyond Phrenology, which I recommend to everyone. But I remember showing a friend years ago my tensegrity and explaining to her that, the spine was not a stack of blocks and things like that, and not like a tower, a stone tower. And she said, so if what you're saying is right, then everything else is wrong. And I said, yeah, I know. And I know that's a problem because now we're starting to sound a lot like religion, right? So you must come up against this as well, where where people are saying, wait a minute, I already know about this. I'm informed about this subject. You're telling me everything's wrong?
Yeah. All the time. All the time. And then I explained to them about paradigm shifts and how paradigm shifts work and how I genuinely believe we're in the middle of one, and just give us time.
I see you guys as being in a paradigm shift and us being in a paradigm shift, the people studying biotensegrity. And we're, again, it's that cousin thing. The first tensegrity maybe was made 100 years ago, but the first ones that people really start to know about are from the middle of the last century with David George Emmerich over in Europe and Kenneth Snelson here in the United States. And you guys have around 1950, you have Gibson's work, and I think Bernstein's is before that, but we're working with material that was established in the last century. We're working with concepts that are maybe 75 years old.
Yeah.
And which have been maturing over that time and developing. But yeah, Jeff, what do you say when people come to you and say, what, everything I learned is wrong? I've been studying psychology for 10 years, 40 years, or whatever,
I have a lot of students who say, well, can't both be right? Like, can't we compromise? Can't we find the middle ground? And I'm like, well, no, you can't have the earth revolve around the sun and the sun revolve around the earth. Like, one of them is going to be wrong. You're going to have, and you can't halfway it. You can't half the, no, it doesn't work that way. And sometimes the tendency is to try to bridge the two perspectives, and that's if one's wrong, then bridging them is not any better.
Yeah.
So, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think it. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of places where we have to, we're telling people that they're wrong, and that's
That's
or
a quote that was
yeah,
just put into
or
the
at
chat.
least I think maybe a better way to say it is that we're studying different things.
Sure.
Like I was describing before, like, okay, you're studying this, and in that case you're going to have to make these assumptions. Well, we're just studying something different, and
but it's a little,
because
I'm much less
because
kind about it.
well,
I just think they're wrong. I think
but
they
it's
have
a little
questions
like
for a while.
having one foot in the boat and one foot on the dock. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision, and as Steve Schafferman, just put a quote from Thomas Kuhn, paradigms are incommensurable. So
Yeah,
are working on a paradigm shift from what to what.
right. And yes, and I think it's worth remembering that paradigm shifts take forever. And it's not because of communication, it's because changing your mind is very hard. I've said this before, right? It's a rare person that can actually change their fundamental assumptions and their fundamental beliefs about a way a system works. So it's unusual when you can get somebody who will do that. So when a paradigm shift happens, it's not because a whole bunch of people change their minds. It's because the new idea got taught to the younger people and then the older people died. I mean, like the idea that the earth was round took over 100 years to catch on. And it's not because, they didn't have the ability to disseminate that information. They disseminated that information, but there were so many people who were like, but it looks flat, right? And they're not willing to change their minds. And so the idea, because it has merit, because it works better, because it explains more things, catches on with more people. And then that's where you get the people who are coming into the field learning the new thing, and then the old people die. And then now everybody thinks the world is round.
This is the joke about science progressing one gravestone at a time.
Yeah. I've not heard that joke, but I'm going to
haven't
use
either.
it going forward. I might not even cite you.
Oh, it didn't originate with me, I can assure.
All right. I'm just going to pretend it's mine though.
So yeah, what are some of the embedded assumptions that we're studying biotensegrity? I can tell you that, and I've been at it whatever number of years I've been at it, 15, 16. I'm still peeling new layers on this onion. I'm still finding new areas in my own thinking where I have an embedded assumption that I wasn't even aware I was operating on.
Sure.
So you guys, the people in coming out of Connecticut and that the whole ecological psychology field, to me, you guys have an amazing culture of not only the sort of we're all equal here, we're all working on this together, but that we're all unpeeling the onion together. We're all, finding these assumptions together. Just great critical thinking skills that I'm seeing coming out of. And when I applied, was looking for a master's program, that was one of the top programs on my list. But because I was a mom with little kids in Washington, D.C., I needed a program where I could travel and stay there for a week and then be home for the rest of the year. And that was not an option. So, but I remembered that's when I first found out about it, because I was interested in kinesthetic learning and trying to find a program that could help me explore that. So assumptions, critical thinking skills. What are some of the assumptions that we're walking around with and we don't even know it?
Ooh, a lot. I mean, I think the ones that are troubling for our field is the assumption that you sort of inhabit your body as being separate from you, right? So, I like to say it's like it's in our language even. Like, look at this. This is my hand. Like it's a thing I own, right? Because I can own it because it's separate from me. Whatever me is, it owns this, right? And so that one I think is one that it is insidious. It is just everywhere in psychology, and it is very hard to get people to stay away from it. Right? I think even people in our field, you'll sometimes hear us like slip back and be like, "No, wait, hang on. That's not going to work because I'm talking about a homunculus again, right? Like hang on." Right? But the central executive is all over psychology. So to me, that's the big one. Like that's the one that is everywhere and very, very hard to root out because it's so compelling, this feeling that I'm looking out at the world through my eyes, right? That I'm somehow sitting in here looking out. That's a compelling feeling.
My central executive.
That's right.
Lives in a little part of my brain.
Yeah, the pineal gland, according to Descartes.
Would you say?
Yeah, I would say that another one is that Euclidean geometry and Newtonian physics are real. That I think, no, really, because
Yeah.
it just feels like, well, and just like we inhabit our bodies are in a space that has a shape to it, and there's eh, that we use words like depth perception and spatial cognition. I don't know what that would mean. I don't know what it means to cognize or to think about space when space doesn't is a concept without it's not instantiated in anything. And even when you open up perception textbooks and it talks about perceiving depth or distance or color, or and these are all things that don't really exist except um, in context, like we were describing earlier. And this is another one of the ecological, it connects with the ecological approach, that we don't perceive the world in these terms. um, I get into disagreements with people about, and or I get in discussions with students. I ask them things like, well, okay, well, tell me where the depth is. Where's the depth that you see? Where's the color? Is there a color? Point, show me red. Is there red? Well, no, there's no red. There's only red things.
Right.
Ah, well, now that changes how we talk about how we perceive the color, because it's now attached to a thing. The thing has properties. So that I think we uh, we these things have become reified.
Okay, so I feel like I could talk to you for at least a half hour just about the whole Newton thing. And the thing is that we're almost to an hour, if you can believe it. And
Oh,
I
wow.
feel like I could talk to you guys for a week, but I need to also give other people who are here in the room with us an opportunity to ask questions. So anybody who's here with us in the Zoom call, get ready, use the raise hands feature if you can. Steve's going to jump in first, but before that, one more question or one more thing that I just want to pry the lid or creak open the door on is the whole affordances constraints thing. I was listening to you talking to a sports guy, and he was saying, instead of a constraints led approach, I'm doing an affordances led approach. And I thought it was interesting. What are constraints? What are affordances? Is there a yin yang kind of thing going on here?
That's a tough one. I would,
Yeah.
I'll tell you the big problem I run into with the sport, because we've actually done a number of these with sports people, and we've consulted with sports people. I don't I don't sport. I don't do sports ball. And so when they say things like I'm switching from a constraints led approach to a affordance led approach, I'm like, well, that sounds good. I wouldn't know what that meant in context, but I do like affordances. So let's go with that. I mean, so this is where I run into the problem. It's like I don't really know what it means in context because I don't sport.
But Jeff, you do. You're an ice hockey guy.
That's true. No, well, so I think the constraints led approach is this idea that you are changing the task, and in hopes that by constraining it in a particular way, you're going to develop some sort of flexibility in performing. But I think what now I can't remember this guy's name that we were when we were talking about this. Um, I think what his concern was that the constraints have to be informed. If you don't, if you have constraints that are informed in performing the action, then you've got an affordance led approach. If it's just do it with hopping on one foot, do it hopping on the other foot, well, then that's just that's a constraints led approach, and you're not really getting anywhere. It has to be context specific. It has to be transferable. If it's just variety, then variety isn't always useful. Variety and that transferable variety is going to be useful.
Yeah.
Well, I've provided for anybody who's on the Biotensegrity Archive newsletter for the last couple of months. I've been providing many, many, many links for people who want to take a deeper dive. But Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you for a sec.
Well, what I want to do is thank you people for you are my legacy. I mean, it is, it's the first time I've seen this concept go outside of the very small community about integrity people. So I consider you people my legacy, and I mean, I'm overwhelmed by hearing it from you people. It's just marvelous for me. Uh, I spent a wonderful weekend up at Yukon with Turvey and a group there. I guessed in his home. It was just a delightful thing, and did one of his wonderful weekend brunches that he did there. It was delightful. I had one final argument with him that at the very end, we never completely resolved when he was using the tent model as a tensegrity, and it isn't. It's because it depends on the outside peripheral things to support it. It was my last argument that we never completely resolved.
The tent
But
model, like the tent you go camping in, is that what we're
yes,
talking?
yes.
Okay.
He used the tent model you go camping in, and the tent was, has to have outside pegs and supports and things like that, and
That's nice.
therefore it wasn't a true tensegrity. That was my last time, but I had a delightful relationship with him. He was a wonderful man, and I really enjoyed just being with him and talking to him. It was delight.
Yeah.
With that, I'm overwhelmed by what that you have taken biotensivity and made something of it. It shows that it goes beyond the biomechanical aspect that we've been dealing with mostly. It goes much deeper than that. And I'm really excited to see that happen. As I said, I see people as my life. You have to know I'm pushing 93, and I don't see much more
Cool.
time in this world where I'm going to be able to push anything anymore. So I see it now evolving and into a much bigger thing than what it was 50 years ago when I first started working with it. And thank you so much. That's all
Thank you.
And
I mean, I've
for
said this before, but I will just keep saying it. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. It is pulling together, and the way I think of it, it's funny because I think of it where we're like, we sort of stole it. We were like, fabulous, this'll work, and just like stole it and put it right there in there, and it worked great. Like that's how it feels.
it's my
So
gift to you. I
I'm
want you
glad.
to
I'm glad you don't mind the way we're putting it to use.
take it and run with it. That's what I want you to do. I want to pass the baton.
and in terms of the tent thing, there's the tent model of the old-fashioned pup tent with the, either hanging from ropes from a tree or whatever. And then there's the more modern tent that you buy today where you have a frame and you put that frame, you use these posts and these to expand the tent,
Right.
which is more like a tensegrity. And anybody who's interested in that, we have a couple of tea parties we did with Bruce Hamilton, who worked at the North Face, who worked with Bucky Fuller, who is the reason we have that kind of tent today.
Tent specific experience.
Yeah, it
Gotcha.
probably holds together when the wind blows better.
Exactly. Well, right. The wind will blow the whole tent and it will roll as a whole
Unit.
structure. So anybody who's interested in that, look up Bruce Hamilton and his work. Thanks, Steve. Jeroen, I'm going to bring you up so you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I succeeded in unmuting myself. I had a question for Jeff because he was talking about lawfully structured stimulation patterns. and I'm from the corner of another long lost cousin, I guess, which is process studies, process philosophy, and process physics. And so this is a relational ecological worldview, basically. And there are a lot of people in that area who have embraced Charles Sanders Peirce biosemiotics, and he talks about habitually grooved patterns of stimulation, basically. So, do you see a way in which we could interpret lawfully structured stimulation patterns perhaps as habitually grooved, based on what preceded? So that would be my question, if it is understandable.
I think so. You mean habitually grooved? I think I get what you're saying. But I think the difference is the stimulation patterns would be structured
Regardless.
regardless of whether an animal. It's not a matter of they become more structured over time. You might become better at detecting them over time.
I'm gonna say, are we talking about attunement maybe? Is this?
Yeah, yes, well, things accumulate and build evolutionarily. So that would be the a habit-based way of development.
Yeah. So I mean that sounds. I mean, if we were talking about that kind of behavior from our field, I think where we would intersect here is we're talking about attunement. So what Jeff said was right, that the information patterns are the same regardless, otherwise they wouldn't be lawful. Right? If they change over time, then they're not lawful. They have to be the same regardless in order for us to have a law-based account, which is the point. But that doesn't mean that we automatically know how to use them or we automatically are good at detecting them, right? If that were the case, then babies would come out of the womb and be able to, do backflips, and that's obviously not happening. So we have to attune to things over time. We have to learn to use the information that is there appropriately, right? So one is learning about detecting it, right? And that's going to take exposure to it and time and repeated interactions with it. And the other is about learning how to actually use that information. And same thing, it's going to take time and repeated interactions with it. So when you talk about like habitual learning, that's what I think of in an ecological way. I'm not entirely sure that because I feel like we're coming at it with a different set of words. So I'm just not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but that's what it made me think of.
Probably, yeah. Well, I'm thinking of perception action cycles, for instance. These will develop through time,
Yeah.
which is a process of habit. We would call it something like that.
Sure.
And so I see a lot of common ground here.
Yeah.
And so that's what my question came from.
Right.
But thanks for going into it.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, Diane, I'm going to bring you up. Let's see. So you can unmute. Diane, where are you again?
I am just outside of Toronto, Ontario, not far from Lake Ontario.
Oh, great. So go ahead.
Hey, I just wonder, thank you for both of your presentations so far, and I so enjoy the language and the connectedness of the whole thing, and that comes from my study of Rudolf Laban, and I wondered if you ever heard of him.
I don't think
But
so.
it sounds
No.
like I need to.
Yeah, Diane, why don't you give them an overview of your background? Yeah.
Okay. Well, Laban died in 1959, and in the years before that, he was fully active in Germany, and before that in the Austro-Hungarian community, because his father was a military governor. Anyway, he grew up watching people, watching what happens in the military, the everything, the fighting and the moving and the marking of all kinds of spaces. And he decided that he would study movement, body movement, and study body movement as life, not in any mechanical way, but as a way of understanding culture, and because of his growing up in Germany at the time, he had a systems view. He had a view of the whole body and how it worked together. So he proceeded to develop ways of seeing that. For example, he looked at how the body uses its energy, and he called it effort. And there were several kinds, ways, effort, body space, effort space. He was a wonderful observer of people. He started out observing all these soldiers and things, and then he continued to do that. He studied art and ultimately created a movement approach, a written approach for notating movement, human movement. And this could be any movement. I studied it in university. I studied Laba notation in university. The whole point was that he was not in any way a mechanical person, and there was never any use of what I call the big three: body, space, effort, body, the use of the body as a machine. So anyway, he was thinking what you are thinking, but he did not have that particular language. He created another language because there was no language for it. And it was a big surprise to people, but it also appealed to a large number of people who then wanted to study this approach. And it started out very much with dance, and goes way beyond that. When I studied Laba notation, then I had to create the dances that were built in that system, and then I performed them. And so there was a repertoire that was being built up in the dance world by that system, but it's much more than that, much more, because we use it today, and we continue to use it today, and we continue to use it study at the Laban Bartenieff Institute of Movement Studies in New York and all of its satellite programs. But there is this other field, and I'm about to tell a couple of my advanced colleagues about ecological psychology, because it's not studied. It's not studied in this field. They don't know about it, and yet it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So anyway, the things like, the body parts are never separate. The body moves in patterns, and when you want to train it, you train the patterns. You don't train the fragments of the body.
That's excellent. Yeah.
The space around the person is real in the sense that it is called a kinesphere. So any direction that you reach without taking a step is your kinesphere. Okay, I can move through my whole study of the kinesphere is called space harmony. And those are a few of the big things about it. What you do if you want to work with a sports person, you don't do the bits and pieces.
Right.
All the sports people we talk to, I believe all of them are only doing bits and pieces. Right. They do not understand how the whole thing works, and how energy comes from the earth into the body and is exploded throughout the body and makes things happen. And this is a huge piece missing from the sports world because they are so stuck with the mechanistic view. Anyway, I started asking you if you knew who Laban was, and you didn't. So,
but then I Googled it because you said about the dance part of things, and then that started ringing a very faint bell, and so I Googled it, and then I was like, I recognize this. So I have actually seen those images before of like how to notate the body, but I
yes,
can't say we make much contact with it in eco, but I've seen it.
Okay, good.
More long lost cousins.
That's right. I mean, that is the way of things, isn't it? I mean, you see in the progression of any science that people rediscover things and, see it in optics, all that you go back and there's the people discovering light travels in straight lines in lots of different time periods and in different ways. It's just sometimes that's how it goes. You have to rediscover things a few times before it sticks.
Yes, yes.
His most famous space was an icosahedron. I mean, the movement body was an icosahedron, which of course fits right into it's right back into where we were.
Yes, there's your exploring your kinesphere, finding out how to get around, how to get around, and use the space and use your energy in the space.
And Danielle Claude Martin's book on biotensegrity has like a picture of somebody inside their huge icosahedron kinesphere, exploring their kinesphere.
Sure.
For anyone who hasn't seen it. Thank you, Diane. I'm going to bring up Bob. Bob, you can unmute.
Thank you, everyone.
Bob, you're a PT outside of Baltimore, right?
Yes, I am a manual physical therapist outside of Baltimore. So everything I do is based on the perception of touch. So I really appreciate learning about, this because this is something that, that I've, not known about. So I have, I guess, a statement and then kind of a quick, question. But my statement or just, insight was basically when I was a student, I would see my mentors do something and then do something else. And I'd always ask them, well, why did you do that? And they could never really explain it, to me. And so now that I'm teaching and mentoring and I might be working on somebody's back pain, then all of a sudden they'll see why I have one hand on the back and the other hand is, goes to the foot or goes to the ankle or goes to the head or goes somewhere else. And it's like, well, why did you do that? It's like, well, I could feel, in the tissue that there's a pull from something else. So I could explain that. But now I can say is, okay, what we're talking about is haptic perception. And what I have is an article that you can read, which can go into more deeper insight so you can make more important, clinical, decisions. So one, I appreciate learning about this because now I can be have much more of an intellectual response and refer people to that paper and seeing some things being introduced to Michael Turvey is like, that's it. And I guess a quick statement I was thinking of, Julie, just from my statement, being an athlete, just my example of where this might fit in is like, if I'm I played a lot of soccer. So if I'm on the field and I see that I have to make a 40-yard pass to a teammate. So my question is, okay, am I playing on grass? Am I playing on turf? Is there wind blowing? Is it blowing into me? Is it against me? Is the field wet? Is the field dry? Is there a defender in the middle so I can't pass straight? I need to kick over their head or around them. So those are all the decisions that I have to make in order to make, the pass to that person. So that's how I would apply, some of this. But my question is something that Jeff mentioned, and I brought up in another meeting earlier ago. Is I was out for a walk through the neighborhood with my wife, and I noticed that as walking on the road, and there's a slight curve to it, and so I just walk around the curve and don't even think about doing it. So my question is, okay, well, what actually am I doing? because I mean, maybe there's a motor pattern, but it's like it just happens. It's like, okay, what actually am I doing? And I noticed that if the curve would go slightly to the right, whenever I planted with my right foot, so all of a sudden I have a ground reaction force, as we've talked about in meetings, and so I'd unweight myself. I noticed that my upper torso would slightly rotate to the right at the same angle. And if it was a sharp angle, then not only would my trunk rotate, I would also have more of an arm swing. And so I would, match the angle. So that's kind of what I noticed and how I would kind of explain that phenomenon. But would you agree that that's what's occurring in that type of thing? Because it is the whole body moving, and it's not anything that I'm doing consciously. It's all unconscious, but my body just smoothly does it, whether it's to the right or to the left, and the similar thing happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you described a movement, but I'm not sure that that's how you did the movement. Right. So I think what you described is probably exactly what your body is doing. But in terms of being an actor in a place, the way we describe it anyway, so something like staying with a turning, let's say that you're walking on a sidewalk, right? Just for the argument's sake, right? Imagine you're walking down a straight sidewalk. As you're walking down that straight sidewalk, the optic flow field is flowing past you and it's symmetrical. So you have an equal amount of the right side of the sidewalk and the left side of the sidewalk on either side. And as you walk forward, the place in the center of that from which all of the flow is coming is in the center of the sidewalk. So walking straight, you just move to keep that center of the expansion in the center of the sidewalk, whatever that might mean, right? So now the sidewalk is turning. In order to turn with it, you do the same thing. You keep the center of that expansion in the center of the sidewalk. You make sure that it continues to be symmetrical. Now, the way you have to move to do that is like you described. You end up, turning the foot, and the torso turns with it, and all those movements happen. But we would argue that it's the information that constrains the movements rather than a motor program that is being used. Okay, put the foot down at a slight angle and then rotate the torso into place and then rotate in the other foot. Like we wouldn't say you would do it piece by piece like that.
That the pattern, it might be the I don't know, the outcome of the biomechanical system that you're using, plus the structure in the optic array and an intention. But if you were on crutches or crawling or in a wheelchair or quadrupedal, you would find a different way to organize the biomechanics with the same intention, with the same perceptual information. So it might be that with the constraint of bipedalism, then that is exactly what you're doing. But I think it would manifest differently and with different modes of locomotion.
Right.
Yep. No, I would agree. Thank you. I mean, it's like I noticed that was the outcome that my body was doing,
right,
based on the visual information coming in.
Yes.
So I perceived, and that was the reaction. So I was thinking that way, but I really liked that your explanation of the visual field and the turning of the sidewalk and staying in the center. That explains it really well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
And there is an ecological approach to rehabilitation. You guys might know about this already.
Oh, it's fascinating.
People like Paulo Silva at the University of Cincinnati do a lot of work in this area.
Sergio's student.
Yeah.
Oh, that's who Paula is, you're saying. Yeah.
Paula is Sergio's student. Yes.
And I don't know a lot about that field, but I do know that one of the primary things that they're looking at is context, is that behaviors occur in a context. And so you're going to do rehabilitation exercises. They can't be in a vacuum like most physical therapy is. It's got to be related. And this is the mindful constraints-led approach, that you have to put constraints on the process, but there's got to be a reason for those constraints. They've got to be wrapped up in activities or goals rather than just because.
And in addition to being context on the context of the environment, it's also context dependent in the the biomechanics of that particular body. So like Jeff was saying, like, what if you were in a wheelchair? What if you were on crutches? What if you had a knee that didn't work so well? You have a biomechanics that's going to self-organize around, your movements are going to self-organize around those biomechanics, right? So, I've got a bad back. It affects how I walk all of the time, right? 100% of the time, I have changed the way I walk because I had to. So my constraints of my body change the way that I navigate a space, and I watch my children just like tumble through a space, no problem. I wouldn't ever move the way they move right now. So the different bodies, the different constraints have a way of moving that is appropriate for them, rather than there being like some ideal to which we should all physically aspire.
And Paula Silva, right?
Yes.
That's the name?
Paula Lana Silva.
Yeah, and I believe that there's a Beyond Phrenology interview with her that for anyone who's interested. And Julia, you have a good back.
Oh,
your back
yes.
is trying to communicate with you.
It does. It keeps me upright. I'm very happy about having one, but I'm also conscious that I have to treat it with care.
Well, you need to go to someone like Bob who understands the systems of things, because I have a friend who texted me the other day. She bought my book way back, the Everything Moves book, and she said, I can't read this. I don't understand it. I said, thank you for buying it. Texted me the other day and she said, I went to a new physiotherapist. I really love him. I started talking to him about my back and all my problems. And he said, no, it's in your right shoulder. And she said, of course he was right. So there's your nonlinearity.
I love that,
my friend.
Yes,
And so use this as a way to find a different way. Thanks, Bob. I'm gonna bring up Steve.
Thank you.
Let's see. And Steve's in Washington, D.C. and studied with Moshe Feldenkrais.
So I'd like to immediately jump on Julia's comment. I have a bad back, and that kind of language is so common, nearly universal, and it's obviously dualistic. I have implies
this.
that I and the back are separate parts or pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And my primary mentor was Moshe Feldenkrais, and he began with the idea that moving, sensing, feeling, and thinking are really inseparable.
Yeah.
And that everything is functional.
Yeah.
Whatever we do in order to be able to function more effectively in the world.
What's the name? Can I get this name again?
Moshe Feldenkrais, Feldenkrais. My first book is about him. It's called Awareness Heals. And that's really the essence of his thinking and my thinking, is that what we're aware of or what we're not aware of, we're constantly making sense of the world at a cellular level. It's not just the whole person, it's not just the brain. Moshe actually was inspired mainly from becoming the first European to earn a black belt in judo. While this is back in the 1930s, he was a principal assistant to Frederick Joliot-Curie in the top physics laboratory in the world, while his wife was a pediatrician and he was studying the way young children learn and move. And saw the very young children move like his judo master from Japan, with a low center of gravity, with muscles everywhere working harmoniously. And that 99.99% of adults have acquired habits and belief systems which say, I have a bad back, I have habits of holding my breath. And so your bad back really is just a set of habits. And the book that I'm currently writing and nearly finished with is called Outgrow Back Pain. And my idea is that if we look at the way young children learn to walk and how they outgrow crawling, we can apply practices based on that process, help people at any age outgrow back pain and leave it behind, or outgrow arthritis, or outgrow breathing difficulties. And it really is an ecological approach in every sense and a psychological approach in every sense. And I put into the chat when I was writing Awareness Heals, in the final editing, I went through and eliminated every use of those tricky 4-letter words, mind and body.
Yeah.
And I've since made it a practice for decades now to avoid those 4-letter words and to look at the whole person as rigorously as I can and to think functionally and constructively as I can. And so
You're one of us.
I did all this kind of, I have back pain because you and your back and your thinking are all it's all you.
Yeah.
And it's you as you're functioning in the moment and as you're functioning in a way that's less than ideal and less than you're capable of in the moment. And so the question always is, how can I help you be more aware and skillful in this moment so that your back is no longer a concern?
Yeah.
So that
I'm probably revealing too much of my personal life in this, but there was like a year I spent completely unable to like walk because my back was so bad. And then I realized slowly that it was a stress response.
Yeah.
And then, like, as I started reducing the stress in my life, as I started figuring out like how to handle some things, I started doing more exercise, eating more healthily. And it was like all of those things were reducing the stress and the pain went with it. And as long as I keep my stress below a level and I don't do things that are not good for me, like lifting incredibly heavy things for which I am not built, the pain is gone. Like I don't actually have pain anymore, but I do walk differently than I used to, partially because of all of that exploration. But for me, it was very much a stress response, which again is that like, hey, it's all one system. You can't separate the biomechanics of a back from the fact that your stress response releases cortisol, and you cannot separate all of those things. They act together as a system, and you will move differently when you are stressed, and you will sit differently when you are stressed. And so all of those things become a problem. So this is, I guess I'm probably like oversharing here, but I'm down quite a bit.
And
got some therapy. We're good.
A large component of those problems is the abstract word stress.
Right.
Every experience of stress, anxiety, depression, fear involves habits of holding the breath and stiffening the trunk and the back. And part of outgrowing those stress responses is just learning to breathe and move more skillfully. And when you are aware of those old habits, knowing how to exhale and move more freely. So
I'm very aware of my breathing.
and this gets back into basic neurophysiology. Right. And while holding our breath or while inhaling, that stimulates the sympathetic fight, flight, freeze responses. While exhaling and just breathing effortlessly, that stimulates the rest, relax, recover responses.
That sounds
and
like
both sets of responses are always active, and we're constantly functioning as whole persons. But again, we've been so socialized, so miseducated to these old mechanistic, dualistic models.
Right.
And that's one of the great challenges with biotensegrity and with ecological psychology and with what I call flex-aware, is to step fully into the new paradigm.
Love it.
Thank you, Steve. We're getting short on time, and I want Carol to come up. Carol, can you unmute? There you go. Carol's in Maine.
I just want to support everything that Stephen just said and add a little bit of another perspective. I am a physical therapist as well, a manual therapist, and I follow the biotensegrity energy perspective that Steve Levin has developed, along with John Barnes' ideas about what happens in fascia with the energy flow, with the dynamic tensional integrity flow of energy through the fascia, and especially the polysaccharide ground substance. And so our ideas about ourself and the world and the stories we tell ourselves are very much reflected in our posture and in our movement. And I want to encourage you to see in your area a Barnes myofascial release physical therapist, because I believe that what they can do
Really, I'm
is
good now.
help you find those fascial restrictions where the ground substance is congealed, and energetically through manual therapy, particularly the way Barnes teaches it, gently open up that space and allow you to move in different ways and unwind those patterns that are stuck in there and give you a new kind of freedom of movement, all consistent with the things that you're talking about, the things that Stephen talked about. It's all one process of learning how to recognize this whole complex organizational system that is so responsive to mechanotransduction and ideas.
Right.
That's my plug. Thank you.
I really am good now. Like, I'm not in any back pain. So thank you. But if I get there again, but I thank you.
Thanks, Carol. All right. Well, we've been here for an hour and a half. I can't believe it. The time has absolutely flown by. And we'll have to get into Newton another day.
Sentences you only hear in this field.
I'm gonna turn it over to you, Jeff, to do a closing toast for us.
Sure. I didn't know what I was going to say, and I thought about it during our discussion. And I'm going to go back to one of the lessons that Michael Turvey tried to teach all his students. He was from so many of you, and I mentioned this because many of you talked about your interactions with him and how rewarding they were. He was from the East End of London, and so he called this piece of advice Cockney law. And that is, when something goes your way, celebrate it for as much time and with as much energy as you would have been upset if it had not. And that's something that I think we can all try to do.
Perfect.
Very good advice.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to sign us off of YouTube.